Sometimes teams can get off to a great start and then for some strange reason they flounder and they choke and maybe they choke into the playoffs, get in the back door, or even worse, you choke and you can't even make the playoffs. There's been several occurrences in the Big Four history that it's happened that you had such a great start and a terrible finish. The New York Rangers of 24-25 had such a great start, 12 wins in the first 17 games, and yet they're not going to the playoffs. In basketball, I can't really think of any basketball thing. With baseball, the Dodgers had once a good 50 game stretch and they didn't make the playoffs. Like the 1951 Brooklyn Dodgers and the 1978 Boston Red Sox had great leads and then choked everything away and lost in a playoff. Even in the NFL, things have happened. The 2003 Minnesota Vikings started out 6-0 and they missed the playoffs. On the final day, losing to a Hail Mary by Arizona of all teams, giving the Packers the division title. The 1993 Miami Dolphins, which I have covered, they were 9-3 at one point, 9-2 at one point, and they just won the Thanksgiving Day game with Leon Lett's bubble, and then they lost the last 5 games, including one that should have been a touchdown that would have counted in instant replay. But I digress. The originators of the 6-0 collapse are this team. We're talking about the 1978 Washington Redskins. And do note that I am going to be using the name as a historical reference, as in that's the nickname of the team. I'll try my best not to say it as much as I can, but no problem. So get ready. I said, are you ready? Are you ready for some Cutter What If NFL football? A weekend invasion! Yeah, it's Cutter talking to you live. We got the hits and the misses. So come join me for all the fun. All the rowdy friends come in. It's the weekend, y'all. Are you ready? Yeah, let's do this, baby. Yes. So you may want to know the history of the Washington football team, now called the Commanders. Well, it started in 1933 being in Boston, and then a few years later decided to head to Landover, Maryland, and be the Washington Redskins. Washington were a decent team and all that. In 1940, they got their butts handed to them by the Chicago Bears, who beat them 73 to nothing in the NFL title game. Washington would purge along. Sammy Baugh was a two-way star. He was the quarterback and punter, and he also played defense too. He was basically one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history up to the 50s when Al Graham took over that role. But, Washington were a decent team. They did have some problems and hiccups and all that. But led by Sonny Jurgensen and Billy Kilmer at one time, the Redskins got to Super Bowl VII, the final against the undefeated Miami Dolphins. Everyone thought that, Washington's going to lay down to Miami, but they didn't. Miami was up 14-0 late in the fourth quarter, going for a field goal to make it 17-0, which would have been the weirdest stat line. The Dolphins went 17-0 regular season playoffs, and then they would have won 17-0. But unfortunately, the kick was blocked, and Gary Premian decided to pass the ball instead of just laying down and giving Washington possession. And went into the arms of Mike Bass. He scores a touchdown, and Miami still wins the game 14-7. But Washington only lost by 7 points. People actually put Washington as a favorite in that game, thinking that Miami's 14-0 mark was a fluke. Well, I mean, it wasn't a fluke because Bob Greasy went down in week 5. The Dolphins could have laid down flat and died, if you will, but Earl Morrow led them to a massive comeback. Washington were big in the 70s with a big rivalry with Dallas, as always. We'll talk about the 70s teams more when I talk about the 1978 Redskins, but the 1980s, they were pretty good. 1982, they looked like they were going to win the Super Bowl in the strike-shortened season, which they did. They took care of Miami quite easily, and that was not with Dan Marino. That's a common misconception, is that Dan Marino was on that Miami team when they lost Super Bowl 17, but no, it wasn't. He was drafted by the Dolphins late in the first round that year. Nevertheless, Washington were pretty good. Joe Theismann became a very good quarterback and all that. Unfortunately, his career would end November 1985 when Lawrence Taylor made a hit on him and bent Theismann's leg backwards in a squeamish part. Lawrence Taylor immediately figured something was wrong and motioned for the medical staff. Even he was an opposing player. Nevertheless, Washington still kept going. Well, they did score over 500 points in the 1983-84 season, but the Raiders beat them using their powerful defense and knowing what Washington was all about. Washington carried on. They went to Super Bowl 22. Jay Schrader was supposed to be the star quarterback, but he went down hurt. And Doug Williams, a cast off from Tampa and the USFL, if I must say so, decided to be the quarterback, and he led Washington to the Super Bowl win 42-10. He threw for 5 touchdowns in the second quarter, and Timmy Smith ran for over 200 yards. Everything looked good for Washington, but Timmy Smith's agent basically made Timmy Smith a one quantity and wanted Washington to give him a massive contract. You can kind of guess where this is going. It went down south quickly. Although Doug Williams was at the end of his rope, Washington still drafted well at the pivot position with a certain Canadian by the name of Mark Rippon. Yes, he's Canadian. Look it up, people. Rippon would not be the strongest quarterback in the NFC, but Washington started out great with Art Monk, Charlie Brown, not that Charlie Brown, John Riggins, Joe Washington, and the Smurfs being the wide receiver core, and the Hogs, the offensive tackle line of Joe Jacoby and Russ Grimm, among others. Washington had some good defense. Dave Butts, Dexter Manley, who went to the CFL, Darrell Green, and Mark Mosley kicking. So the fact of the matter is that the Redskins were looking pretty good. They even started off 11-0 to start the 91 season, and thankfully blow it. They went 14-2. They beat the Bills in the Super Bowl. Of course, Buffalo was distracted by Fred Thomas losing his helmet on the sideline. So Washington was decent, but then they fell flat. Joe Gibbs retired to go into NASCAR ownership, which was good, and then he went back to football. But anyway, Washington was struggling along. Unfortunately, Dan Snyder, once he bought the team from the estate of Jack Kent Cooke, was just a terrible owner. I won't bore you with details. I'll just say that Snyder was more interested in trying to sign like star players who were past their prime. Bruce Smith, Deion Sanders. I can't remember. There were a few other players, but basically Snyder was trying to sign the 1992 All-Pro team in 2000, if you will. It didn't go over so well. And let's not forget the glutton of Florida quarterbacks who were University of Florida, like Danny Warfel and Brad Johnson. No, Brad Johnson was FSU. You get the gist. That Steve Spurrier, when he became coach of Washington for 2 seasons, he brought Florida players because the run and shoot offense in college, but it didn't work out that way. Washington had a bad stadium. Their owner was a dickwad, and the nickname, of course, was contentious. Even Native American groups were against this move. So Washington finally decided to get rid of the Redskins name. A lot of people were pissed off with that, but it was done so because Washington was losing sponsors. FedEx did not want their name to be associated with their football field. So Washington bent and became the Washington football team for a few years and then the Commanders and all that. Washington's been going through a tough time, but Jaden Daniels had a very good rookie campaign, including that improbable Hail Mary against the Bears. I think week 6 or 7, I can't remember, but yeah, that Hail Mary was great. So if he becomes well known, then Washington should be in good position to challenge the individual. And Washington got to the NFC title game last year against Philly, so they can go nowhere but up. Now let's talk about the 1978 squad. So the 1978 Washington Redskins, it was their 47th season in the NFL and the 42nd in Washington. They were 9-5 in 1977, and they went 8-8. Of course, there's a little bit of a move because in 1978, the NFL decided after Tampa and Seattle played there, they decided to expand from 14 to 16 games. So that's why Washington had played 16 games instead of 14 the previous year, and they expanded the playoff format to have two wildcard teams instead of one. Nevertheless, Washington started off 6-0. They were 8-3, but then for some reason they choked their last 5 games. That losing streak happened to the St. Louis Cardinals. Yes, the Cardinals were in St. Louis at the time, the football team, and it started 0-8. The Cardinals would not win in Washington for 15 years, and that at that time they went to Arizona. Billy Kilmer was still there for Washington, backing up Joe Theismann. He decided to retire. Anyway, the roster was Kilmer and Joe Theismann. I know his name was Theismann, but Notre Dame rhymed him with Heisman, obviously. Joe Theismann, one of the greatest players to start in the CFL and then go to the NFL later on. Like Warren Moon, also, or two. Clarence Harmon, Benny Malone, and John Riggins running the ball. Their wide receiver and tight end crew was not really that great. Tad Fresh at center. Jim Harlan, Dan Nugent, Ron Sull, and Jeff Williams. Clay Bacon, Dave Butts, a defensive line. Mike Curtis, a great linebacker from the Baltimore Colts days. Chris Handberger into the Hall of Fame. Pete Wasocki. Defensive backs Ken Houston, Lamar Parrish, Jake Scott, the former Miami legend. Lamar Parrish, the former Bengals legend. Mike Gregg, punter, Mark Mosley, kicking. And they started out 6-0. They beat New England, Philly, St. Louis, New York, Jets, Dallas, and Detroit. Then they would lose to the Eagles and Giants, beat the Niners, lost to the Colts, beat the Giants to go 8-3. But then they fell to the Cardinals that were terrible. Then went to Dallas and got their butts handed to them on Thanksgiving Day. And then they hosted Miami, the team that beat them 6 years prior in the Super Bowl, and they lost 16-0. They went to Atlanta and lost to them, and then they lost to the Bears 14-10. So that was just unbelievable. Dallas won the division at 12-4. They were the 2 seed. What's worse for Washington is they fumbled everything. They lost 5 straight. Philly won on the final day to nip Washington and get into the playoffs. It would be a 1-game playoff against the the Atlanta Falcons. So yeah, so the 1978 Redskins would miss the playoffs by 1. But what if they did make the playoffs instead of the Eagles? Let's talk about that, shall we? So anyhow, what if Washington was the 5 seed? They would go to Atlanta, who were the 4 seed and did not win the NFC West. So Redskins, Falcons. This is what their lineups look like. And Washington starts off strong. Atlanta went for a field goal, but Massetti went wide right. So Washington got the ball at their 38. After a few plays, McDaniel got a touchdown, 7-0 Washington. Love you guys. Love you. Anyway, Massetti field goal to make it 7-3. A lot of plays. Massetti missed again for 47 out. Make it 7-3. No scoring in the third quarter. In the fourth quarter, Atlanta scored touchdowns. Burkowski to Wallace Bean in the end zone, 10-7. Washington punts. Massetti makes another field goal attempt from 49 yards out. Boom, off the upright. No good. Washington got the ball at their own 39. John Riggins had a 53-yard run. And then Theismann later on gave John Riggins a touchdown pass in the end zone, 14-10. Unfortunately, on 4th and 10, Falcons missed out. Theismann took knees, and Washington beat Atlanta at the Georgia Dome. That's actually technically wrong because it wasn't at the Georgia Dome. It was supposed to be at Fulton County Stadium. It says at the home team. So yeah, Washington would have. I think Washington would have been in Atlanta anyway. So yeah, Joe Theismann, the hero. There were 6 for 15 on efficiency. Atlanta 5 for 17. Rushing yards 121, 141. Passing yards for close. Riggins 83 yards. Weisman 10 for 21 for 134 and 2 touchdowns. Barkowski 10 for 23, 100 yards, a touchdown interception. That was to Ron McDowell. He made a 40-yard field goal but missed from 47, 48, 49. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It said home team. It was Fulton County. I should have just did that as a thing. Anyway, Washington would face the Rams. The 1 seed were the LA Rams in 1978. So that meant, you know, they would have to head to LA. And just take a look. Wendell Tyler, young Wendell Tyler. John Capoletti on that team. Nice. William Miller. Did he do as a wide receiver? 767 yards. All right. Whatever you say. So, going to LA for the NFC title game. I mean, the NFC divisional round because they were the wild card team. Well, Washington started out quite well. Well, Mosley kicked the field goal to make it 3-0. And then after the Rams punted, Thomas ran 22 yards wide right. Scored the touchdown to make it 10-0. Pat Hayden made the great pass to Billy Waddy, who's got the touchdown to make it 10-7. In the third quarter, Washington, after a while, got a touchdown as Weisman threw it all to Thomas, and he goes down the field, make it 17-6. So Washington looking pretty good. And then the third quarter, after some plays, Washington 8 plays, 70 yards. Weisman to Thomas touchdown for them, making it 17-6. And then the fourth quarter and overtime, for that matter. Fourth quarter, the Rams Bryant went up the middle. They go for two. Well, in real life, the 2-point convert would not have existed, but in what if sports, it does. But they missed the 2-pointer. So it was 17-12. So Washington punted. There's a lot of punts. And then the Rams, with 2 minutes left, 9 plays, 68 yards. Washington did have a couple of penalties to help out. Colin Bryant gets a touchdown. They go for two, and Capoletti makes the 2-point convert and make it 20-17. So Washington knew what they had to do. Starting from their own 23, they tried their best and all that. Getting some passes to Bugs and all that. They called the field goal with 3 seconds left. They needed a 37-yard field goal. Mosley hits it right down the middle. We are tied in overtime. Washington gets a field goal attempt, mostly from 53, wide right. And the Rams get a field goal attempt, wide right by Coral. And then Reagan on 3rd and 12, Weisman to Thompson for 22 yards. And then they ran through Thomas Riggins and then Mike Thomas for 25 yards through the Rams defense, and the Rams lose 26-20. So the Redskins would have beaten the Rams to move on to the NFC title game. Amazing. The Rams again with a choke, if you will. Efficiency, Washington 6 for 14, Rams 5 for 14. 207 yards. Running the ball, Rams 123. Passing 275, 204. So Washington deserved to win. Mike Thomas 110 yards, 2 touchdowns. Reagan's got 98. Weisman 22 for 32, 287 touchdown interception. Pat Hayden 14 for 22, 204 touchdown. So the only interception was to Pat Thomas. Rams Mosley from 25 and 37, missed from 53 in overtime. Frank Coral had only 1 attempt, missed from 57. So Washington wins. So that means they go to Dallas because Cowboys were the 79 number 2 team in the world. So Washington would have to head to Dallas. Can they run the gauntlet? No, they can't. They would have been stopped in their tracks by an old friend, Dallas. Dorsett, on the second play of their second drive, had a 53-yard run. Tony Dorsett, 7-0. And then Staubach to Newhouse makes it 14-0. Dallas up 14-0. Washington in the second quarter gave up a field goal to Septian to make it 17-0. They were doomed. Mosley kicked the field goal. Washington gets a touchdown, Weisman to Riggins, 17-9. And then Dallas scores a touchdown by Newhouse to make it 24-10. Only one scoring play in the second half. Washington was just outplayed, and Dallas would have went to the Super Bowl anyway, to Super Bowl 13 anyway. So Washington would have been stopped short by Dallas. Washington was 9 for 24 on efficiency, Dallas 3 for 12. Rushing yards 56, 186. So Washington's running attack sputtered. Vikings could only get 36 yards. Dorsett 142 by himself. Fleisman 170 passing, 14 for 28, touchdown and a pick. Staubach 11 for 21, 186. Interceptions by Charlie Waters and Dave Butts. Mostly made from a 33-yard field goal. Septian from 36 to 29, missed from 44, but it doesn't matter. Washington would have really ran the gauntlet, but they would have fell to the Dallas Cowboys for the chance to go to Super Bowl 13. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do